Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians, and happy Election Day. I'm Ruth Shelley, President of the Rotary Club of Portland. Welcome to our live weekly membership meeting. As our banner says, Rotary opens opportunities to find solutions for today's challenges, whether it's healing from the pandemic, recovery from the economic downturn, or peace building as we seek racial justice. And this week we focus on door number 3, peace building in a different way, as our speaker Fay Schuler discusses domestic and sexual violence during the pandemic, such an important and timely topic. But first, let's welcome Rotarian Jim Parker for our reflection. Jim?
Thank you, Ruth. You know, life is full of adversity, which gives us a measure of how bad fresh adversities are. But history is much the same way. In the north chamber of the Lincoln Memorial, to the right of the statue as you walk in, carved on the wall is an excerpt from Lincoln's second inaugural address that speaks to us from the depths of a war that claimed the lives of 620,000 Americans, 2% of the US population at the time, what would be the equivalent of 6.5 million people today. Quote, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations," close quote. As a nation, we have overcome worse disagreements than we are encountering now. We can do so again.
Thank you, Jim. I can always count on you for a slice of meaningful history and inspiration. If any of you would like to give a future reflection, please let us know or fill out the link provided in the chat box. And now I'd like to ask that Rotarians who have invited a guest to raise your hand, and we'll call on you to unmute and introduce them. Or if you're a visiting Rotarian who came on your own, please raise your hand and introduce yourself. Do we have any guests today? I don't see any with an initial scan, but if anyone comes in during the meeting, welcome. And thank you all for attending our meeting. And it is November. I'd like to extend a happy birthday to everyone with birthdays this month. As you know, we alternate each week honoring birthdays and anniversaries. Please reach out to all of these folks in November birthdays because it's so hard to celebrate in these physical distancing times. What a great group. Never a year older. Thanks, and thanks, Siobhan. Now, please welcome Phil Levison to give an update on Oregon Ethics in Business. Phil?
Oregon Ethics in Business is accepting nominations for Ethics in Business Awards for 2021. It's pretty simple. Just identify the organization that you want to nominate, write a brief explanation of why you're nominating them. The organization should demonstrate ethical behavior above and beyond legal requirements and standard industry expectations. There are 3 categories: small business, large business, and not-for-profit. Nominations will close on February 5th, 2021. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And we've got time till February 5th, but don't hesitate. If you can think of a business that deserves this honor, please send it on. And now, please welcome Rotarian Mari Bunnage to let you know how our Rotary Week of Service went. Mari?
Thank you, President Ruth. I was so pleased to see people engaging on the Facebook group and letting us know some of their photos, whether it was giving blood or donating puzzles to our Easter seals. It's so great to have had people take part. And as a thank you for part of that, we'd love you to fill out the participation survey, which we'll put in the chat in just a moment. And that is how you will be eligible to receive one of those raffle card gift prizes that we talked about, which are some great gift cards. And also, if you haven't done any yet and you want to add some more, if you want to add more photos or do anything in the Facebook group, please feel free to keep sharing, and we will let you know next week who our wonderful service members are that are going to be recognized.
Can't wait, and thank you, Mari, for your leadership in this cause. And now, as we see the weather turning colder and wetter and stormier, it's very appropriate that we think about November's Committee of the Month, our Homelessness Solutions Committee. Please welcome Rotarian Dan Bramsky to talk about the very important work that they're doing. Dan?
Thank you, President Ruth. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I'm the chair of the Homelessness Solutions Committee, and as President Ruth mentioned, we are the Committee of the Month. So you'll be seeing one of us committee members here at the beginning of each meeting through this month to talk a little bit about what we're doing. Today, I want to have two things. First, I want to initiate a challenge to everyone in our club. Right now, due to COVID, we're all cooped up at home for the most part, and we're not able to get together and do service events together. However, we want to make sure that we are helping those less fortunate than us in our communities. And so we're challenging everyone in the club to find a way that suits them to help the homeless people that might be in your community. Right now, most organizations are accepting only monetary donations. Even organizations that generally accept food are only accepting cash right now. So there's plenty of options out there. Right now, there's also some opportunities with some organizations to donate clothing and other supplies. We're currently working on a list of organizations that are accepting donations. And there's also other options. So at our house, we had a talk with our sons, and here, if I move the right way, you can see here's a picture of my son, Daniel, putting together some little care kits, similar to what we've done previously as a committee. But when we're out driving around town in our car and we see people who are on the side of the road, we put together some toothpaste and shampoo, hand lotion, and I think there's $1 in each bag as well for a dollar menu item at a fast food restaurant. So we encourage you to find things that work for you and your family to get out there and help people. And then, of course, once you're doing something, if you're on Facebook, we have our members only club. We invite you to kind of share with us what you're doing there. Also, today happens to be our monthly committee meeting. So right now, or just after I'm done speaking, I will share a Zoom link so you can feel free to join us for our next committee meeting, which is today at 1:30 p.m. and goes until 2:30 p.m., where we'll talk more about what we're doing. And of course, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Thank you.
Such important work. Thank you, Dan. And I hope you get more committee members because it's more important than ever to help our neighbors who are homeless. And now to continue that theme of service, we're going to enter our breakout rooms, but Rotarian AJ Barnett has a topic for this week. Please welcome AJ to tell us more.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rotarian AJ Barnett. You know me, and let me just say that nothing I am about to say here has been approved or vetted. So if you have a problem with what I say, reach out to me and don't complain to everybody else. So I don't think we're doing enough as a club, and I don't think we're doing enough by a long shot. I mean no disrespect to anybody that's working hard on their committee or whatnot, but I realize the amount of time that we've been putting into things like keeping our Tuesday meetings going, our committees, our boards. I've been putting a ton of time into this Thursday speaker thing that some of you guys have attended. But the fact is, we're not changing the problems in our community in a large way relative to the amount of effort, talent, and money that our group has. We are leaders, in this community. We have very, very connected people. We have $4 million in our trust account, or about that, I don't know how much. And we are really powerful. Rotary, at one point, Rotary made the decision to take on polio. And right now, we're putting a ton of effort and energy into doing the same things we did last year, and the year before that, and the year before that. We're trying to make improvements on a candle instead of inventing a light bulb. And that's not enough. We call ourselves Rotarians. That's a really big word. It has really big weight behind it, and I think we need to do something else. And I think we need to do something more. I don't have an idea for what that thing is, but somebody in this group either has that idea or somebody in this group knows somebody who has an idea. So what I'd ask you to do is go into these breakout rooms and let's try and find a SMART goal. A SMART goal is not just an intelligent goal. It's an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. We have a ton of money, really well-connected people, and brilliant people who will give their time and effort. So we need to do something more. It has to be apolitical. It has to be, everybody has to be able to see that this is a great idea. And I'm not talking about for the branding of our club. I'm not talking about for recruitment and for retention purposes. I'm talking about if we go on another year and haven't done something out there in the community and all we've done is the same things that we accomplished last year, that's not good enough. So I'm going to ask everybody some very specific things to go into the breakout rooms. Number one, write down everybody, get a piece of paper and write down everybody that's in the breakout room with you so that you can all hold each other accountable. Number two, if you have an idea for something that we could try and actually do as a club to impact one of the problems in our community, whether it's all of the displaced Oregonians by the fires, whether it's the education problems that our teachers are suffering with right now because Zoom is just not good enough, whether it's the drug and alcohol and domestic violence problems that are raging out of control right now, whether it's the state of our downtown economy, whatever it is, there's got to be something we can do more than everything we've done in the past. So number one, write down the people in your breakout room. Number two, come up with an idea. If you don't have an idea, that's okay. Make a commitment to the people in your breakout room that you are going to make a phone call today. You are going to call someone, say the name. Say, I am going to call this person that I know and ask them if they have an idea what my Rotary Club could be doing. And the second thing is, tomorrow, follow up with each other to make sure everybody made their phone calls. I'd like to ask everybody, or one person from each group, to call me with the best idea you guys came up with. And on Thursday at the Thursday 4 o'clock meeting that we have, the Zoom meeting, we'll talk about the ideas that fit into the SMART goal concept the best and try to figure out one that we could do. It has to be attainable and relevant right now. It can't be a project that's going to go on forever. But we need to be able to do something. We'll try and knock something out and then pick another project because we are the action people. We can't wait for our government to fix the problems. This is what Rotary can do that the government can't. So that's it. Breakout rooms. Sorry if I stepped on anybody's toes, except not sorry.
Thank you, AJ. Certainly a provocative topic for discussion at our table talk. And I might add, and thank you, Mari, for putting the definition of SMART goals in the chat. I've also heard of SMART goals, where you add equitable to your objective, because of course we want to, in the words of our four-way test, make sure that our solutions are equitable to all. So now, thanks to Siobhan, we're going to disappear and enter a table talk to discuss this topic. Please introduce yourselves to the others in the group, and in a minute or so before you come back to this meeting, you'll get a visual heads up. Let's remember AJ's request that we write down everybody's name, that we brainstorm ideas for a problem that our club could help solve, and then to follow up with each other and with AJ tomorrow with the best idea that our groups come up with. So here we go. Now on to our program. After our speaker today is finished, if you'd like to ask Fay a question, Maria will moderate the Q&A through the chat box. And now, please welcome Rotarian Wes Harper as today's chair of the day. Wes?
Thank you, President Ruth, and hello, everyone. Any description of today's presenter would have to include the words dedicated and persistent. For 23 years, Fay Schuler has helped women and children be safe and successful. She has served as a shelter services director for a domestic violence resource center, a program coordinator for the Oregon Children's Foundation, the children's program coordinator for Clackamas Women's Services, and a foster family recruiter and trainer for the Boys and Girls Aid Society. For more than 10 years, she was executive director of the West Women's and Children's Shelter of the Salvation Army. Currently, she is executive director of Call to Safety, the agency to contact if you're experiencing domestic or sexual violence. It has been my privilege to work with Fay during her tenures at West Women's and Call to Safety. And it's my pleasure to introduce her today to discuss domestic and sexual violence during the pandemic. Thanks for joining us, Fay.
So nice to be with you all today. Thank you so much for having me. I love any time I get to spend with you all, and especially when I get to hear about the good work that I don't necessarily see all the time. So I've been very fortunate to work with the DV Solutions Committee in many different ways, and have seen the direct support that they've provided survivors with meals, with gift cards, with also coming and showing up to improve playgrounds, to improve access to facilities. So I'm always indebted to the DV Solutions Committee, and I think that you all are doing some really, and have been doing some fantastic work. Also going back to the work that you did around domestic violence in the workplace, that still is an amazing resource in our community that I haven't otherwise found. So I just wanna say thank you so much, and how happy I am to be here with you all. So today I'm talking a little bit about domestic violence and sexual violence in the pandemic, a little bit about what we're seeing and hearing from survivors. And I want to acknowledge that I think we're all under a considerable amount of stress, and that some of you, or some people you know, your family, friends, your neighbors, are probably being impacted by domestic and sexual violence right now. Being isolated in a home and having stressors, increase in the home, lack of financial security, lack of knowing what to predict what tomorrow will provide, children being in the home consistently without any kind of break, lack of childcare, all of these things add to the implications of domestic violence. And so I'm going to share first kind of an image that I think really shows what survivors are experiencing. So I'm going to share my screen, and I tested it out, but here we go. This is an ad campaign that we ran, and it was really looking at, let me see, did it start? Let me see. Oh, here we go. We really wanted to let survivors know that we were around and we were open for business. I think in the first initial days of the pandemic, all of us had to pivot really quickly in how we do our work, and really had to look at how do we continue to reach out to survivors of domestic and sexual violence across our system. What we know is when we're not going and really talking to folks, when we're texting folks, when our communication is limited, it's really hard to open up about what's happening on a day-to-day in your home. And so that also increases risk factors for survivors. What we're hearing from folks is that survivors are being more isolated with their abusers. There's more limited mobility to get support from family, friends, and coworkers. Many times we do the bulk of our safety planning with survivors on our 24/7 confidential crisis line when abusers go to work. Well, when abusers are not going to work, either because they're working remotely or they're being laid off, that really limits any kind of safety planning that can happen with a survivor. We also know that the escalating tensions in our community around racism, around white supremacy is really impacting survivors of color. We're hearing quite a bit about the intersectionality of the different fears and violence and oppressions that folks are experiencing. And that also includes survivors who have been recently immigrated. Throughout my 20+ years of working with survivors, I've worked so many times with survivors who recently immigrated to the United States and then were held in control as a form of control, almost held hostage in their homes because they couldn't get benefits without the abuser co-signing them. And then it could be also dangerous for them to return to their home country. So that is just such an escalated risk for folks in our community right now. The lack of employment and income doesn't allow the financial resources for survivors to leave, doesn't allow for the gas in the tank, the bus ticket, all those different things that really empower survivors in their safety plan to leave a violent relationship. Children being at home can also escalate tension in the home. Never that it's a child's fault whatsoever. That's not at all what I'm trying to say, but the tensions can escalate. And it can also be hard to do resource navigation when your children are always there and needing your care and they're doing the remote learning. We know that we're all hearing that there's been a considerable spike in gun ownership across the board. And what we have known for a really long time is that when guns are in the home, survivors are at the risk of being killed increases by 5 times by that abusive partner. So just having a gun in the home really increases the risk of fatality due to domestic violence. We know, and I tried to get some solid numbers, but it's really the way we report domestic violence, related homicides is interesting in our community. And so I know that the homicides have been up. We all hear that also the gun violence homicides have been up. And that we're seeing more and more reports. I think what I've noticed is I often see them on the news, but then they really get hidden by all the different competing messaging and urgent crises that we're experiencing as a community right now. What we have noticed and we've heard from survivors is that when we know that the majority of survivors do not report or do not access law enforcement. They access confidential services and their family and friends to get safe. There's many reasons why. It could be fear of retaliation, not knowing what will happen. If someone goes to jail, they might not get the financial support that they usually receive. But we do know that for the survivors who are calling 911 and asking for help due to a dangerous situation, there's much longer call wait times. That we also know that the way restraining orders, we very quickly, our domestic and sexual violence system here in Portland did a lot of advocacy with the courthouse to make sure we could have remote restraining order hearings, and that's worked out well. But what we know is that the restraining orders getting served is concerning. So typically restraining orders, attempts to serve a protection order can happen, 1 to 2 or so times, but sometimes they're getting delayed and even happening one time, and then there's not enough law enforcement to try to serve that restraining order again. We actually even had some staff here who were wanting to start serving restraining orders on our own, but of course we're not going to do that. But I think that we're looking for creative ways and working with survivors on how protection orders can get served. Because if the protection order has not been served, they don't have any due course with law enforcement or with the courts. We also know that a lot of officers, unfortunately, have been taken off of the domestic violence and sex crimes units, and they've been dispatched to respond to the overnight protests. So they've been put on the overnight shifts, and they're no longer part of the detective crew. And so that means it's a much longer wait time when folks are accessing 911. And that also, what we're hearing is that abusers are not necessarily being booked. It's kind of like catch and release, that they're brought in and then they're let go, and that there's no survivor notification. So we're really trying to work with survivors to be really clear about what the expectations are right now for accessing help in the community. And I wanted to share another image here. Let me see. Oh, hold on. Is it not? 1 second. Here we go. So this is some information from early in the pandemic. What we heard from, actually Portland made the national news early in March. And it was reported that in Portland, just when public schools closed from March 16th to March 23rd, the Portland Police Bureau saw a 22% increase in arrests related to DV compared to prior weeks. And you can see on this map the increase in a few different cities in Alabama, or a few different states, Alabama, Portland, Texas, and New York City. And so I was also looking at some reports from China, Australia. Everywhere is seeing increases in domestic violence due to isolation at home, stay-at-home orders, lack of resources in the pandemic. Okay, switch back here. Okay. Part of the ad that we ran, and part of what we want you all to know, is that the domestic and sexual violence system is open for business. We have really pivoted our work very quickly to remote work. Most of our services are confidential victim services. And so we are held by a very high like HIPAA requirement, or we have advocate privilege. So confidentiality was a big hurdle for us in technology to overcome, but we did so in the early days. So we were able to really move our work remote, try to implement best practices while upholding survivors' confidentiality and using technology. I was very thankful that folks from the DV Solutions reached out to me pretty early in the pandemic and asked how to help. And that was one of the conversations that we've had. We have moved all of our support groups remotely. And so we're using Zoom. And what we're finding is that folks who were initially in our support group program prior to the pandemic are really staying on because it's a sense of normality for them. It's a sense of connection that they're not getting otherwise. So Call to Safety operates a 24/7 confidential domestic violence crisis line, but we also operate and dispatch the 24/7 confidential hospital response for sexual assault survivors. And I think the hardest part of our work in this kind of adjustment is that we haven't been able to go in the hospitals. So we've been doing all of our support, our confidential support, when a survivor of sexual violence is having a forensics exam, otherwise known as a rape kit. We're doing it all via phone. And that has been our biggest hurdle. It's really hard not to be there in the hospital with a survivor. I've gone on multiple calls before, and it's always an honor to be in that space with someone when they're feeling so vulnerable and needing support. And we typically, when we're in person, we stay for the duration from the beginning until the survivor leaves the hospital room. And now it's just different. It's more of a call and a lot more focused on follow-up services. Our domestic violence shelters are open in Portland, but many of them have had to reduce capacity for social distancing, or they have to not rely on one bathroom, or they have to reduce capacity because of bathroom access. So, but the domestic violence shelters are open at West Women's and Children's Shelter, Bradley Engel House, Raphael House. Clackamas Women's Services is doing motel vouchers for their participants. So we want survivors to know that there are resources out there. The other thing that we're seeing is that because there's not a lot of movement in housing right now, a lot of folks are needing longer stays. And that was a truth before the pandemic, but even more so now. So that's really how our entire system has pivoted. Here at Call to Safety, after we had been hearing all those concerns from survivors, we really tried to increase or tried to mobilize our resources. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we have seen a 330% increase in the motel vouchers that we've operated off the line. We typically operate $30,000 a year, and I think we're at 140 since the pandemic. So we've been utilizing every resource that we can to make sure that we can provide motel vouchers for survivors when shelter is not an option or they cannot relocate safely due to the pandemic. We're seeing more and more complicated crisis lines. That time period that I talked about with the PPB and the increase there was actually our highest call volume time that we had. Because we're remote, some of our call reporting technology is not working in the way that it does when we're working from our call center. But we definitely saw huge spikes in calls right at the beginning of the pandemic. And now what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of trends up and down. We always see trends when there's, on days like today, like election day, when there's uncertainty in our community, but it's very unpredictable. And we're also, it's much more complicated calls that staff are taking many times from their bedrooms or their homes around how to safety plan when mobility is an option, when financial resources aren't an option, when they can't necessarily just drop in and sit in your office for a few hours. We have really, as a small nonprofit, we've got about, I think now we've grown a bit, but we've got about 16 full-time staff. And our budget typically just went, well, this year I think it was 1.3 million, but we, just since the beginning of March, we have dispensed $190,000 of financial assistance to survivors. And that is anything from paying their car insurance so they can still drive to work, paying for safety and security within their home, rent payments, back rent payments, driver's license fees. We've been giving out basic needs gift cards so folks can get groceries and diapers. So we have a lot of flexibility and really grown a flexible pool of resources that will support a survivor's access to safety and housing stability in their safety plan goals. We also have expanded our text and chat hours. So we are trying to find new platforms to engage with survivors in the community. So if it might not be safe to talk on the phone, being able to text with someone and provide them resources right to their phone. So we have expanded those hours now from 8 to 4. We're also, we've expanded those hours also because we are the access point or entry point for the New Day program, which is a collaboration between New Avenues for Youth, Call to Safety, and Raphael House, which looks at youth at risk for sex trafficking or youth being sexually trafficked in our community. So really trying to find new ways to engage with folks. What I ask from you all, I think that the way we support survivors is much more in our community than ever before. I know every time that I try to walk in my neighborhood, I'm trying to make eye contact, I'm trying to check in on people. I really want to feel connected to the people who are in my circle. And that's what I ask from you all, to check in on your family and friends. When you get a text message that says, I'm fine, maybe pick up the phone and call. Share resources. So if someone is disclosing domestic or sexual violence to you, go directly, Call to Safety's website. We have many different resources there, and make sure that you have resources at hand to share with survivors. And most important, listen and believe. Create the space to listen and believe what they're sharing with you and ask follow-up questions. These are real tangible ways that you can help folks in your community, in your circle. And I just wanted to share this last, I think that what we're experiencing too is that many of us come to this work or we try to help others because we have our own experiences, we have our own past trauma, and the current day-to-day reality is really bringing up a lot of that trauma for folks. So I wanted to share one last thing for today with you all before I go to question and answer. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Oh, it might, maybe I'll start answering questions and while I locate where I put this last image to share with you, because I'm at 1251.
Well, Fay, while you're looking for that, thank you so much for a very provocative and thoughtful presentation. I'll start out with a question. I'm just wondering if your clients are exclusively women.
Not at all. Not at all. Yep. So actually, Call to Safety changed their name. We used to be Portland Women's Crisis Line, but in 2015, we really wanted it to acknowledge and embrace all survivors. So from our hospital response, from our support group, from our crisis line, everything we provide is open to all survivors.
That's great to know. And Maria, I think we have some questions in the queue.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Fay. We're going to start with Rotarian Bill Diaz. Bill?
Thank you, Maria. I'm wondering, you mentioned your budget of $1.3 million. Where does the bulk of your funding come from? And can an organization like ours help you in more than what we've been doing?
Yeah, you know, we had to cancel our fundraiser. It was April, 3rd of last year. So we have a yearly fundraiser. So I think a lot of small nonprofits are feeling the same thing of our traditional ways of raising funds outside of government resources have been diminished. So we do get a bulk of our resources from state and local funding sources and some federal funds, very few, but always really rely on private donations, foundation grants. We try to solicit at least $80,000 a year of foundation grants to just have that flexibility. We want to be able to respond to the flexible needs of survivors. And I will say that, you know, Bill, the DV Solutions community has been wonderful, not only for Call to Safety, but for our entire system. And that's really how we work. We work as a collaborated, coordinated system in trying to respond to survivors' needs. And I think they're, you know, the gift cards that you all do, the tangible help, the providing the meals, those are all wonderful, really, really helpful things that you are providing to the community. You know, I think we talked a little bit earlier in my group out session about permanent supportive housing. And that was a project that you all really learned a lot more about best practices, and that those are happening in our community right now, and maybe finding ways to look at the different communities that are providing permanent supportive housing and providing tangible move-in resources, I think also would be a great way to look at the need. But I know the grants that you've done previously for technology, years and years ago, we got one of the technology grants, which really was one of the first times that we were able to provide computer access for kids so they could do their homework after school. So I just say keep asking what the needs are, but you all are just amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fay. I'm just going to open it up. Rotarians, are there any other questions? I didn't see any other electronic blue hands, but I do see a physical one. So I'll go to Rotarian Bill Derville. Bill?
I'll get on mute. Fay, in our breakout session, one of the persons suggested that as a Rotary Club, we create a professional video about domestic violence and put it on social media. Is that something you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think so. And I think actually really, you know, I think to your community too, and to the businesses too, because domestic violence, no one is isolated from the risk of domestic violence. It is impacting all socioeconomical, all, you know, communities. And so also just making sure that really has a broad approach, and that we're not being isolated and thinking about maybe folks who are experiencing limited income or lack of resources, but really opening that door. I think sometimes when you have more to lose because you're coming from maybe a more visible community or more financially stable, it can be harder to ask for help. So just normalizing that this can impact everyone, and especially right now during the pandemic.
Thanks, Fay, and thanks for all that you do and have done.
Thank you. Bill, are you saying that your committee is going to look to make that video and maybe share it with the rest of us?
I'll bring it up with our committee, but it was not, the suggestion was not made by a committee member, by just someone in the chat room.
Perfect. Well, I know personally, I'd love to share that. I liked your point, Fay, about normalizing. I just had a question myself, and if others have questions, please, I'm looking for physical hands too. But I was interested to know about the holiday season and coming into this time of year. Are there any specific differences or things that we need to be uniquely paying attention to, or different services that happen for the holiday season?
Yeah, I that's really interesting. I think, it's the tangible stuff. And so here at Call to Safety, we don't do a lot of holiday giving, but at West and other shelter is definitely huge. And I think being able to look at what are the tangible resources. The toys are fantastic and they make the kids happy. And tangible resources, gift cards, be able to buy foods, the diapers, the strollers, the play pens, it just, to me, that goes so far, with a toy, the pajamas, yeah. So maybe making them a little bit more tangible.
That's such a good reminder, Fay, as we ponder all the things that we have to be grateful for as Rotarians, that we share that gratitude with others. Thank you again for such a wonderful presentation. And we've got
share
another
this screen real quick. Can I share this last thing real quick? Just
Sure.
something for you all to remember. As advocates, and I feel like as you are all advocates for the community, it's helpful to make sure that we have a survival guide so we can continue to do our good work in the community. So this is this little image here about different ways that we can make sure that we've filled ourselves up so we can continue to fill other people up. Because once we get exhausted and depleted, we have nothing else to give. So I just wanted to share this with you and just once again say thank you for everything that you all have been doing.
That's wonderful, Faye. And we actually had a request in the chat if you are able to share that with us, either with a link in the chat or if you can send it to Siobhan and then we can disseminate it. I see a lot of things in there that I need. Wonderful.
I'll send it to Siobhan. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And next week, we hear from our fellow Rotarian, Carol Salter, Executive Director at Easter Seals, Oregon, on her organization's work with veterans who are homeless in honor of Veterans Day. This meeting will once again be live via Zoom at noon on Tuesday. And we're so glad I didn't catch any virtual guests, but if you showed up, we're glad you joined us. Jim, thank you for your reflection. And Phil, Mari, Dan, AJ for your presentations. Wes, I always appreciate your thoughtful introduction of our speaker. And Faye, thank you again for such a thought-provoking presentation. So timely. And now, as we enter into a new Rotary week, please join me in opening the doors of opportunity for healing, for recovery, and peace building. I think we talked about all three of those today: healing, recovery, and peace building. As Rotarians, we're here to make our world healthier, more sustainable, and with justice for all. Have a good week, everyone, and this meeting is adjourned.